Welcome everyone to Government Contractor Chat. I am Lindsay Riegelsberger, Director of Operations and Business Development for Streamline Government Contracts. Streamline helps small to mid-sized government contractors who seek experienced, effective support with contract management that reduces risk, increases profits, and enhances reputations. We do this by negotiating teaming agreements, subcontracts, preparing estimates of completion when necessary, and speaking to contracting officers in their own language. We are the proud organizers of Government Contractor Chat, and we thank you for joining us today. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker now. Marie Jarabak has 20 years of experience in pricing strategy and business development. In leading business volume proposal development and compliance, she helps organizations unlock their full revenue potential, negotiate value-added teaming structures, and build confidence in competitive decisions. As Vice President and Pricing Strategist, Marie specializes in aligning pricing models with market dynamics, customer behavior, and long-term business goals, turning complexity into clarity and strategy into results. Marie's executive experience leading corporate and operational organizations and government defense contracting provides realistic and scalable pricing frameworks that focus on profitability and competitive advantage. Please join me in welcoming back Marie Jarabak.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to having this discussion today. I know it is coming at a great time in industry since we have a lot of changes with some of our compliance factors. So we're kicking things off today talking about SCLS compliance. SCLS, of course, stands for Service Contract Labor Standards, which has replaced the old Service Contract Act or SCA terminology. Service Contract Labor Standards, or SCLS, is a set of published wage determination schedules by locality, and they mandate minimum hourly wages, health and welfare, and fringe benefits. These are controlled and audited by the Department of Labor. In some cases, the contracts explicitly state SCLS applies and even provide mappings of contract job positions to SCLS occupation codes and job titles. However, in many instances, especially now where there's reduced workforce and offices are busier than ever with less staff, it becomes more the obligation of the offer to check all of the job requirements of the contract and determine if SCLS applies. It is always the responsibility, whether it is explicitly stated or not, of the offeror, not the government, to map positions and resources to Service Contract Labor Standard wage determination schedule categories and rates. This is a big compliance factor. A lot of times people will rely on information from the government, but ultimately, again, it is the requirement of the offer. Of course, this means that also must flow down to all subcontractors. And because of this, we often recommend that prime bidders provide suggested Service Contract Labor Standard mappings to all teammates once you have determined that they could apply. With SCLS contracts, paid leave is by seniority, measuring how long the individual resource has supported that particular Service Contract Labor Standard contract in that position. It is not measured on how long they have served with a particular company in the position. And for that reason, we always highly suggest that offers bidding on contracts with SCLS Labor always request a seniority list of incumbent personnel from the government during the Q&A process. Without this, estimating actual SCLS fringe costs could be difficult, and ultimately your response could be non-compliant. Your rates could not encompass all fringe requirements, and it could end up becoming a situation where your proposed rates are not adequate for the requirements of the labor workforce in place. Many schedules still have references to Executive Order 14026, which was rescinded back in March of 2025. Offers should not set minimum wage determinations against that executive order, despite them still being referenced in the SCLS contracts. I expect it will take some time before that reference is fully removed from the wage determination schedules. Ultimately, offers need to be pricing the hourly wages at the prevailing SCLS wage determination rate, again, not at the federal mandated Executive Order 14026. There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not the rescinding of that executive order means that you bid against the SCLS wage determination, or you go back to the Obama era executive order, which set the minimum wages around $13.35 an hour. Ultimately, you should have those discussions in-house. You should be consistent with how you're applying those determinations, and you need to be consistent on that from contract to contract. Compliance with SCLS contracts requires a well-trained and informed team of HR and management professionals. These contracts require a considerable oversight to ensure compliance and avoid fines and audits. So how do you stay compliant with SCLS? Unlike other contracts where you could be tempted to bid based on opportunity, you really need to bid when it's SCLS based on knowledge and capability and information's in-house. So again, you need to engage your HR team to ensure that they are properly trained on all the classifications of exempt and non-exempt staff, that they are familiar with the Department of Labor determinations for the classification of staff, and that they know how to accurately benchmark resources and employees to SCLS positions. Further, once you are awarded the contract, there are consistent monitoring and engagement requirements. This could be everything from posting flyers on workers' rights and pay, along with updating and notifying your employees on prevailing wage schedule changes, health and welfare changes, or any impact to the SCLS requirements or contract. One of the key things in terms of staying compliant is that offers should not escalate SCLS wage rates. We want the rates to remain flat for all contract periods until the prevailing service contract labor standard schedule has been updated. Unlike other contracts where you may be tempted to keep salaries in line with market conditions to support recruiting efforts, with SCLS contracts, you want to keep SCLS rates static with no adjustment. And the reason for this is that you are only allowed to have a request for equitable adjustment that will change the awarded SCLS rate to the updated prevailing SCLS rate. This goes for the wage determination hourly rate and also any associated fringe costs associated with that wage determination rate. You're not allowed to adjust things like overhead, G&A, or profit. If you have IFF on your contract because it's under a GSA schedule, you're also not allowed to adjust that. With an REA, you can, again, only recover the difference between the awarded rates and the new published rates. So if you adjust your direct labor and fringe and you increase those out of line with the published wage rates, then you may not be entitled to an REA, and you may not be able to get the difference of the adjustment. And that's a common and very costly mistake that we see within industry. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about collective bargaining agreements. So most collective bargaining agreements are inherited as part of a contract award. Offers are going to be obligated to conduct negotiations with the collective bargaining agreement, or CBA as it's known. And if the CBA terms expire during the period of performance, you are going to be under, both parties are required to continue negotiating in good faith until a new agreement is reached. In most cases, the terms of the old CBA remain unchanged. So like the SCLS contracts, what we often see is that there is a period where rates are not adjusted. They are held static, again, until a full revision of the rates change. A lot of times the CBA rates will not be updated retroactive. And so it's really important to have cost control and manage and monitor all of your costs and have everything accurately tracking. The costs associated with the administration and management of CBA contracts should be considered when evaluating indirect rates, because the size and complexity of the CBA itself may have a material impact on indirect costs. While these aren't directly recoverable, it is really important to understand what that impact is going to be and to make sure that it's not going to have a negative impact on performance or execution against other bid and proposal efforts and contracts. Like service contract labor standards, CBA agreements establish minimum wage determinations, fringe requirements, and contract terms. When bidding a CBA contract, offers should build fringe cost specific to the CBA requirements, as they most often exceed a typical industry fringe pool. This goes with SCLS contracts as well. So in order to be compliant with the requirements of the solicitation, that will state that it's the offer's responsibility to bid rates, including fringe, that are compliant with all wage determination requirements. You really need to build that fringe pool up from the bottoms up, considering all of the contract terms and requirements. This is going to be things like health and welfare, medical, contributions to retirement, minimum paid leave, and of course, the wage determination rates themselves. For that reason alone, it is absolutely critical that anyone who wants to get engaged in CBA or SCLS contracts really understand the difference on how these are executed and has a knowledgeable team in place that can build compliant fringe rates and be able to ensure that the risk associated with executing these is covered in those rates. With, again, SCLS, CBS escalation clauses exist that prohibit escalation beyond published schedule rates. So again, very similar, again, in the idea that there is published rates, you remain those rates remain static if they do not extend beyond fully for the contract period of performance. The way we look at CBAs is that they can be opportunities or they can be landmines. And really the difference is depending on how informed, prepared, and established an offer systems are during the bid and execution phases. So again, having a good legal, contractual, pricing, and management coordination around these efforts is the most critical component to ensuring compliance from the bid phase all the way through contract performance. Another critical area that we're looking at for compliance this year and into the next fiscal year are third-party audits. So third-party audits are conducted by cognizant government agencies such as DCAA, DCMA, could be Department of Labor, Small Business Administration, or independent agencies where contracts and contract vehicles are held. Audits evaluate labor and timekeeping compliance, business system accuracy, maturity, indirect rate support, and payroll versus billing accuracy, typically during contract closeout phases. Typical business systems such as accounting, estimating, and purchasing systems are often audited and reviewed annually or at a minimum at the pre-award or award process of large contracts that meet threshold requirements. Preparing for third-party audits should be a consistent business practice. Leads within all affected departments should be trained and prepared to engage with auditors to shorten the audit time frame. This is because lengthy audits can have a very negative impact on indirect rates, driving indirect expenses up, and impacting the utilization of resources and support materials required for critical BMP and contract execution activities. In our field, we often see that we get pulled in because clients will be going through third-party audits and it will tie up their management, it'll tie up their back office support. And so they end up losing a lot of the critical function that they need to be able to maintain their bid and proposal or their execution requirements. So it is good to make sure that you understand all the requirements around what will happen in an audit and that your teams, again, are organized so that they're able to reduce the time required for the auditor to go through all of the different materials. To do this, you want to try to keep all documents in a central repository and maintain them at the correct levels, whether that's CUI, classified, proprietary, etc. You want to ensure that all the policies and procedures are updated routinely and are specific to your business systems. So if you switch business systems, even if the process remains the same, all corporate materials should be updated. Another area that we make recommendations on for compliance is to maintain all correspondence from the audit agencies. And that would include informal things like emails all the way through formal notifications and audit reports and findings. You also want to maintain a list of any auditors or any points of contact that you have with audit agencies. And you want to track the costs associated with those audits internally so you can continually work on process improvements and shortening audit length. Presenting complete records and compliant data at the onset is the best way to be able to get through an audit quickly and efficiently. The information needs to be accurate and current. A lot of times information is submitted at proposal phases, and then it is reviewed and audits get kicked off if awards on contracts are made. And so being sure that your proposal teams and your internal teams are engaged in terms of what data is being presented with bid and proposals, being promised and offered for audits is really important so that they're not caught off guard. We never want to be making promises regarding business systems or policies or procedures or rates, payroll, indirect rates, etc. at a bid phase that is not matching up with how your business is actually operating. The next area we're talking about is certified cost and pricing data. This has come up quite a bit just because on October 1st, the thresholds have changed. I have a link here in the presentation, but anyone can kind of go and look at these. And as of October 1st, like I said, the new threshold for certified cost and pricing has gone from 2 million to 2.5 million. Many of us in industry feel like this is still way too low. We would love to see those raised about double. But for now, again, it's holding at 2.5 million. It's really important to understand what that threshold means. Essentially, when we're bidding based on the different factors of the solicitation, the contracting offer is going to make a determination on whether the opportunity meets certified cost and pricing requirements. That'll be the threshold itself. It'll be the determination of the contract type. They'll also have to factor in whether or not there's adequate competition. If those conditions aren't met, then the contracting officer may determine that they need certified cost and pricing data. If it's a sole source requirement, or again, it exceeds the threshold, they could trigger certified cost and pricing. When certified cost and pricing is required, an offer must support all cost and price elements proposed. And this means providing supporting documentation and all the calculations for things like direct cost, itemized indirect cost budgets, documentation of forward pricing rate agreements, escalation support, vendor and commercial support, such as invoices or quotes, for non-labor, such as material, ODCs, and travel, and support of subcontractor proposed costs and prices as realistic and reasonable. They also would like support justifying any proposed profit or fee. All of this support and the certification should be updated and accurate as of the time of the agreement. One thing around this from a compliance standpoint is that the final price awarded is not determined until all negotiations are completed. And for that reason, most people will submit a semi-complete certificate in their price proposal, and they will sign that certificate once negotiations are complete prior to award or just after award. In some cases, a contracting officer or the solicitation instructions may appear that they want that signed with the solicitation proposal itself. And if that's the case, then from a compliance standpoint, a statement should be included with that signed certificate stating that it would be updated pending final negotiations should the price awarded change from the price proposed. So with certified cost and pricing data, the reason that compliance is such an issue is because if they conduct this analysis and this audit of all of the data presented and make a determination that there's defective pricing, it could have significant impacts. So defective pricing is when it is found that the data that has been presented is not accurate. So before award, if they conduct the analysis of all the data and they are, looking at your price and you haven't reached a final price agreement, final negotiated price, then they may come to the offer and determine that changes should be made. And they can often do this through negotiations, through notices, or they can come back and ask for revisions or additional information to be able to correct any of the deficiencies or any of the data that they would consider to be inaccurate, incomplete, or not accurate as of the date when the negotiated price occurs. This is going to happen through a price negotiation memorandum, and all of these changes are going to be documented and require a reprice. If it occurs afterward, once a certificate of pricing data has been signed and provided, there are two things that can happen. If the data was found inaccurate, incomplete, or not current, and it was through a mistake, the contracting officer, again, has the ability to come back and request revisions, and they could also request that monies be returned. If they find that it was the offerer who knowingly presented false information that wasn't current or accurate, or a records and data keeping support that was inaccurately representing the business systems or the policies or procedures around the certified cost and pricing elements themselves, then the offerer could be fined, they could lose the contract, and there could be severe legal and financial repercussions. This is sort of an area where, again, if people aren't as familiar with certified cost and pricing data, it's always good to reach out to an expert, get their opinion, make sure that all of your support documentation is accurate. And again, this is one of the areas where documentation around audits, around your business systems, and providing the right level of detail for all proposed cost and price elements is going to be required in order to pass the compliance factors. There are exemptions to certified cost and pricing data. These are outlined in FAR 15403-1. However, even if you meet one of these exemptions, you really need to document the exemption itself and the rationale in a proposal. Simply stating that you are exempt from certified cost and pricing data could impact the compliance of the bid. This is really important when you have teammates, including subcontractors, who are going to be exempt, and they are going to claim exemption status. As a prime offerer, from a compliance standpoint, you should always have those exemptions documented with that subcontractor, ensure that they understand all the requirements as they need to outline them in a proposal narrative or in any of the cost and price data that's being presented to the government. Okay, and this brings us to the 8A program audits. These are gaining a lot of attention in 2025, and the reason for that is that the administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration has launched a full-scale audit of the agency's 8A program development. This began because there were considerable evidence of widespread fraud within the program itself between both the government and industry. And so audits are going to be led by SBA's Office of General Contracting and Business Development. It's going to begin with the high dollar and limited competition contracts, but then it will end up going over all contracts, and it can go back as much as 15 years. And this is being done in collaboration with various federal agencies, such as DCAA and DCMA, and various federal agencies that have awarded contracts to 8A participants. And again, because the length of time can go back up to 15 years, it's really important that anyone within the 8A program that has contracts has their records, in place, well organized, and ready to be reviewed. Offers with 8A contracts should have all their documentation prepared and organized in a manner that's ready to be supplied on financial records, timekeeping, 8A program status qualifiers, subcontractor reporting, and contract records. So that sort of brings us to the conclusion of this review today for compliance. I had to sum it up with SCLS. It is pay people right and classify them correctly. With CBA, it is contract inheritance that you must learn before you agree to play. With third-party audits, the ultimate rule here is that cleanliness is compliance, making sure that you have your records tidy, well-organized, accurate, and up-to-date is of the utmost importance. With certified data, we're looking at truth or consequence. And so not understanding any of your business systems, not having accurate determinations and documentation of how you've determined cost and price could put you in legal and financial turmoil. And of course, with the 8A pricing, again, this applies to anyone who's in and has contracts awarded under the 8A program. You're going to need to document everything and maintain your documentation like you're the one on trial, because ultimately those audits will come to your door. So that's everything I have, Lindsay. I
Yeah,
believe that we can open for questions.
excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds great. Well, don't be shy. Feel free to come on camera if you'd like and off mute, or you're welcome to pop your questions in the chat and I'll be happy to read them off here to Marie. I also have a few, but love to hear your questions. And I'm telling you, Marie is the expert, so I would take advantage of her while you have a moment.
Lindsay, I've got one. Can you hear me?
Great.
Want me to go ahead?
Yes, please, Paul.
Good. Hi, Marie. Excellent presentation. In terms of the an REA regarding the SCLS with new rates, are you saying that once the new rate, the direct charge labor rate has been established, you're still supposed to only apply the bid or the currently awarded indirect rates on top of that? What's the process there?
Yeah, so good question. Let's take, for example, let's say you've been awarded a contract and you've bid the prevailing wage rates, and that was 2 years ago. And during that time, you had Executive Order 14026 was in place. And so you would have either bid rates that were compliant with the wage determination, or you would have bid rates that were compliant with the executive order. Good example of this might be that, let's say the rate was $14 on the service contract labor standard wage determination, but 1775, I think it got to 1785, ended up being the executive order minimum wage. So you would have bid that $17 an hour. Well, now that no longer exists. And so there's a couple of things that can happen. If that is your rate on your contract, you're going to maintain that rate and you're going to continue to pay that rate to the employees until your contracting officer comes to you with a request for equitable adjustment. And if they come to you with that, and they typically will wait until the end of a contract period or the very beginning of the next option period to be able to request that. And they will typically only do it for one contract period at a time. So in this instance, if you were in contract period 2, they would let contract period 2 end. And prior to awarding funding for option period 3, they would do the request for equitable adjustment, and that would adjust the funding levels for that contract period 3. During that request for equitable adjustment, you would have to go back and update the direct labor wages and all the associated fringe to the current prevailing wage determination rate, which is very likely less than the federal minimum wage that was established with that executive order. So right now what we're seeing is people's rates are actually going down. Because their funding levels are going down because they're using the new prevailing wage, which is less than what the executive order was. If you have an instance where you just have SCLS rates, for example, and the prevailing wage schedule has changed and the rate has increased, you never want to change or pay your individuals the new rate until that REA has been initiated. Okay, so even if you're aware of it, and you can make your contracting officer aware of it and say, hey, we have an update to the schedule, we have a revision, the rates have increased, we would like to request an REA. And that can kick the process off, but never, ever, ever make that change and start paying your individuals until the REA has occurred.
Just to expand on that for one quick second. So let's say I've got a $20 rate that I bid and it increased to $22 in the funding next year, but I've charged the government, say, $30 an hour. So initially I came up with the $20 an hour and I had some G&A and overhead that I put on that. So my question is, do we now at the $22, am I supposed to use the same indirect rate structure or same?
So good question. So if once you go through the REA process, what will happen is the government will request that you provide a very detailed resubmission of pricing. It will show that $20 an hour is your base direct labor rate, go from $20 to $22. You are allowed to update your fringe. So you're allowed to update the health and welfare, again, in compliance with the SCA, because typically when the wage determination increases, the health and welfare also increases. But you're able to go back and adjust your fringe, associated taxes, insurance, and the fringe cost. You are not allowed to change the overhead, the G&A, the profit. So your bill rate will change, but elements of that bill rate will have to show as not changing. So you have to itemize these. You have to show the breakout. You'd have to show them the direct labor and the fringe change, the impact of that change. And then you'd have to prove to them that the G&A, the overhead, the profit built into that $30-something an hour rate were not changed. and remain stable.
And by not changing, you mean the rate themselves or the absolute amount that was
The
charged?
actual amount, yeah. So you'd have to go
Okay.
back and look at that $30 rate, and you'd have to say, okay, maybe your overhead was $1.69, right,
Yeah.
built into that rate, and your G&A maybe was, $2. Those dollar values cannot change. They are stable and static within that rate development.
So as a percentage, they almost certainly will go down, your G&A.
Yeah, the percentage will definitely change, and you, as unfortunately the offer, sort of have to adjust that, and that becomes sort of the trick. And right now, again, what we're seeing rates go down because of the revisions for anyone that had rates awarded in the last year or two because of that executive order in some cases. And we're also seeing that the health and welfare on a lot of the revisions has gone up. And so again, maybe your individual wage determination hourly rate didn't change, but the health and welfare might have changed considerably. And that's, again, another reason to go back and look at the changes. But the actual hourly dollar value built into that rate, again, for overhead, G&A, profit, and also IFF. If you have IFF, because it's awarded under a GSA schedule, that, again, built into your rate is not allowed to change.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, great question. What do I do if the contracting officer wants a signed certificate of current cost and price data submitted with the proposal instead of post-negotiations?
So if a certificate of current cost and price data is required at the proposal level, again, what you'd want to do is you'd want to present that certified cost and pricing in your proposal, but you'd want to have a statement directly following that the certificate is being provided and is accurate with all data presented up to the proposal submission date, and that certificate would need to be updated pending any final negotiations with the government on that price prior to award. So essentially, you'd have to give another certificate of current cost and pricing once the negotiations have concluded.
Okay, sounds good. When am I allowed to request an REA?
Yeah, so just like we discussed, the REA can be requested anytime that you've noticed that there's a revision to your prevailing wage schedule. However, contracting officers typically, again, are going to wait until the end of a contracting period so that they can make those changes resulting for the entire contract period, and then also they can forward adjust the next contract period. They do not have to do it in the middle or the beginning of a contract period, and it's really going to be up to your contracting officer when they're going to initiate it, but you can certainly request one anytime you notice that there's a change in the prevailing wage rate or the health and welfare.
Okay, great. What is the most important aspect of audit readiness?
So the most important aspect, I would say, is having your data well organized and easily accessible. When your internal teams are trained and know where the documentation is, and they maintain it and they keep it in a fashion that makes it readily accessible to the auditor themselves, or to be able to prepare it and sit with them and provide the information to them, it reduces the time of the audit. It also streamlines and makes it more efficient for them to go through all the documentation.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Marie. It really is a true pleasure having you join us every time. I'm so impressed by your knowledge and expertise, and I just really appreciate you sharing your time with us and your expertise.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Our complimentary Zoom webinar series, Government Contractor Chat, takes place every third Wednesday of each month, excluding holidays. Stay tuned for November's Government Contractor Chat that will be Wednesday, November 19th. This will be a session designed for small and mid-sized federal government contractors who are looking to optimize their HR and benefits operations while staying aligned, compliant, and competitive in the GovCons space. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you in November.